I would be on time today, but I usually try to leave early. So, um, so yesterday I had a talk with my father and I had a talk with my mother. Um, I had a talk with my father and my mother about things that as a child you witnessed, and then unknown stuff that my mother answered, and um, stuff that I really wanted to bring to my father's attention. So, as y'all know, and you guys been looking at my videos, you know, for the last several years, um, that over 7 years, I want to say 7 years ago, I got my bill of divorce from my husband, meaning he filed for a divorce and he no longer wanted to deal with me. We had a we had like a crazy battle in court, which I thank God that's just over with. And after God had revealed to me, after going to court, that he's still my husband because he's still alive. Like we're still, married, regardless of what the court says. And this was me asking God because I wanted to know, could I date again? And he basically showed me I couldn't. So everything I knew, everything that I witnessed with my parents, with their separation, their divorce, my father getting remarried, having more children, my mother raising us on her own, everything I witnessed, I had, first of all, I told my father, I had a discussion with him in the afternoon because yesterday I was talking about how your marriages, which you do, will affect your children and the community around you at large because they're witnessing how you treat your wife, your husband. If you saw dad treat mom a certain way, then you kind of grow up with this mentality like this is the way a man is supposed to treat, or this is the way a man is not supposed to treat, off of the feelings and emotions that you dealt with. And so I asked my father this question. And the reason why I asked him this is because I'm not going to lie. My own sister said, and I know I'm jumping back and forth, but she said, Mona, I don't ever want to get married. And I'm like, really, Carla? I'm like, I'm sure you're gonna find Mr. Right because at one point in time she was engaged, but there was a horrible relationship for her and such a bad experience that she's just like, she don't, she doesn't want to deal with it. And then she says, when I look at dad and how dad treated mom and how he left mom, and when I look at other family members and what they did to their wife, she's just like, it's no hope out there. It's just like these men, they only care for themselves. And of course I'm just like, Carla, that's not true. There's plenty of men out there that's really looking for a good wife. So I would not lose faith just because of that. And of course, while I'm giving her that encouragement, I'm thinking about my own situation where my mother, for years, and I mean decades, she had to raise her children on her own, you know, and my father left and there was no support. And she just depended on God and did what she had to do. And so I remember when, I'm not sure if I shared this in the last video, but when my husband first said he wanted a divorce and he left and he never came back, I thought I was gonna crack. I really did. I really thought that I was just gonna go nat. Like I was just like, I just had a baby. You left me. I'm all alone in this house that your parents own. I don't know if they're gonna put me out, and everything I feared, it just came upon me. As soon as my husband left, within weeks, my mother and father-in-law sent an email saying we want you out. It was just like, and then I mean, y'all already know about the court thing. I don't even want to relive that situation. thank God I made it out. But it was nothing but God that held me together. But I understood at that particular time, I was going through so much and I really wanted my husband there. And I felt like abandoned and betrayed. And so I remember saying to my mother, I just had a baby and I'm, crying and everything. And my mother, as wise as she is, she stood there and she looked at me and said, I had to do it with four. And when she said that, I was just like, it was like, hold on. You did have to do it with four. And so when I was talking to my father, because my father had asked questions about my husband, he was like, have you heard from him? Have he came around? And again, my father and my mother, they were there when I went through my divorce. And I told my dad, and this was recently, I was like, no, I haven't heard from him. And then I had a conversation with my father and I asked him, and I said, I want you to understand something. I want to explain to you, especially what happened when I was young, when you left. And I just have a question for you. Why do you hate my mother? Why do you hate your wife, the one that you married? Why do you hate her so much? I said, because when I look at the model of my parents, when I look at my father and how you treated my mother, it gives me no hope of my husband ever saying, I'm sorry. Because I witnessed you leave my mother, leave us, and go on, and that didn't even look back. I witnessed that. And so I looked at my mother because my mother had to go out and get a job, and I told my father, so it's kind of like similar, because I had to go out and I had to provide for my family, for my daughter, and it's like as if my baby's not able to see her father, and on certain times because mama's working, she's not able to see her mother. And I said, and I'm grateful for my mother because she's there to watch over my daughter while I'm working. But I'm like, do you see what that has done? And so I told my father for the longest, and this is a conversation I had with my father yesterday. I said, for the longest time, I couldn't, when I dated a guy, if a guy told me he was going to do something and he didn't do it, I would kirk off and spaz off because you would tell me, Mona, I'm gonna come and visit you. Mona, I'm gonna be there for your play. I'm gonna be there um for your I'm gonna be there for this. Look, I'm gonna be there for your graduation. I'm gonna be there for you being crowned homecoming queen. My father wasn't there. He wasn't there. And I said, when you didn't show, it hurt me. But it hurt even more to know when you walked away from Ma, and I remember I was in elementary school. When you left out of that house, I knew you were going to come back the next day and you didn't. I knew you were going to come back the next week and you didn't. I said, okay, maybe 30 days, maybe 60 days, and you never came. And then I lived in fear for the longest time that my own mother was going to abandon me because my father did. And so when my husband, and I explained to my father, I'm having this conversation with my father on the phone. So when I told my father, so dad, when my husband walked away, I still got the recording on my phone when my mother-in-law said that he's just gonna stay over to our place and he'll be back. Dad, one day went by and I said, okay, my husband, he's gonna come back. That 2 days went by and I kept calling and I'm like, okay. A week went by and I'm like, I know he's gonna show up. I know he's gonna show up. 2 weeks went by. A month went by. 6 months went by. A year went by. 2 years went by. 3 years went by. And now I'm on my seventh year. And when I look at my mother, and I told my father that you don't understand how it was to go through the time wanting you to be there, to be our protector. And then again, I literally thought in the back of my mind, what if my mother decides that she can't deal with four of us and she doesn't come back? this is when I was younger. And I remember around that time, they used to have these little commercials about, especially in the 90s and the 2000s, they started had these commercials would come up about the parents having the talk with their children about mom and dad is going to separate. Like separation was just the thing to do. It was just like how they sell cigarettes. You know, I don't know if y'all remember. I don't know how old y'all are, but remember the Newport commercials, the cigarette ads and stuff they used to have. They had those in the 90s until at one point in time they banned them. But even back in the 50s, they had cigarette commercial smokes everywhere. But it was like they were selling this separation of the family. So anywho, so I was talking to my father about this, and I was just like, you know, and Belinda, when she came, well, I don't mean to put her name out there, but the woman that my father committed adultery with, I could not stand this woman. And the reason why I could not is because I knew she wasn't there. So when I would call my father, because you know back in the day you had call, so when my father called from a number, we called the number back. And when she would pick up the phone, I would hang up in her daggone ear, because I did not like this woman. I did not like this woman because I saw my mother go through it by herself. And I told my father, I remember when it was storming, I think lightning struck. It was like a big boom. Me and my brothers and sisters ran to my mother, and my mother was trying to hold all four of us. And we were crying, and we were crying for our father. And I remember that. And I said to have not even to have come around and only dropped off a couple of dollars and kept going, that was a hurtful feeling. And at the longest time, and I told my father I was really mad with God. I remember one time in my room, and this is the truth, I remember cursing God and going off and screaming and crying. And I mean, I broke down, and the reason why, and I was all by myself, and I was just talking to God, just going into this rage. And then all of a sudden, this calmness came over me, like the love of God came over me, and I was crying. It was because my father was not there. And I told my father never knew that. So I said, when I look at it, here I am grown. Of course, you got to forgive. But when I look at a model of my parents and I see what you have done to my mother, and now you both are up in age, I mean, you're not dead. But looking at how you treated my mother, it gives me no hope of how my husband would be towards me. And he said, well, Mona, he gave excuses for my husband and said, well, he was dealing with something else. I said, look, if my husband know how to jump in his car, put gas in his car, if he know how to ride to the daggone 7-Eleven to pick up a pack of cigarettes, there's no excuse. Because something in you would say, you need to make something right. And you did. And I had to explain to my father, you went and you started a new life. My mother lost her only son. Her only son, her youngest, and her only son died. But the struggle for her to have to go through that on her own, do you not even understand that a wife, a woman, we look for the strength in that man because we are the weaker vessel. And mentally we're sitting up here trying to say I'm strong, because you have no choice, especially when you holding it down for your children. But I told my father, like, because of your actions, it made me have an outlook on life. It really did. And at the same time too, with my mother, and anyway, so I'm sitting up here and I'm having this conversation with my father. And so my father says, well, I think that your husband, I know he's thinking, I know, he's going through. He said, and my father said that when I started, it went all downhill when I committed adultery. And he was very transparent about the different women. It was different, it was multiple women. My father was a catch back in the day, but it was multiple women, but it will all go downhill. And he said this is the reason. He said out of his mouth, he believes this is the reason why he's dealing what he's dealing with, because he sinned against his own flesh. And now his flesh, he's going through so much stuff right now. And I don't even understand. Somebody, let me tell you something. The devil is a liar. Okay, sorry, y'all. So anyway, hold on. Sorry about that because we got somebody online who wants to we got somebody online who wants to be a huge distraction. So anyway, so when I was talking to my father yesterday, and he was breaking it down, like bottom line, like adultery, adultery is that's pretty much what happened. Is that adultery? He started messing with other women, and that's when it all just went downhill from there. And he said that he went to come back home, but the locks and everything was changed. And I told my father, I said, well, how come you just never apologized though? I said, even if she didn't feel like hearing it, because where my mother's at right now, and she's like, okay, she's she's done with my dad. She sees him where he's at. She has the love of Christ for him, but she don't want to be bothered with it. And I think, and I understand what she stands for, because it gets to the point at a time where a person can hurt you so much and keep doing it and keep doing it, and then it gets to a point where you just like, you know what, I love you, Christ like, but I don't want to deal with it. And that's where she is in her life. And when she speaks of my father, and I had a conversation literally after I spoke to my dad, me and her had a conversation. Later on, me and her had a conversation, and it was bad memories that she had with my father. It was the struggles, it was the lies, it was the hurt, it was the pain, it was the betrayal. And I'm like, well, mom, she's like, this is the thing. When she said, I've had enough with that. And I can understand where she's coming from, because here you are pretty much in your 60s, and you were married. My mother and my father were literally on paper married for 15 years. And I was like, Dad, gone it. And I was like, well, Ma, you shouldn't have went ahead and filed for a divorce. She said, let me tell you something. The only way that you can get any type of help with any type of system is that you got to be divorced. And she said, when them love notes start coming in, you're gonna get put out because no type of support. And I have 4 kids, and he abandoned us. She went ahead and she put in the divorce papers. Now it reminds me with my situation, because I kept saying, like, I didn't want a divorce. No attorney will represent me, because in order for them to represent me, the first thing they was like, you gotta file for a divorce. And I'm like, I don't want to file for no divorce. And they were like, well, that's the only way that we can help and get involved. But it sounds to me that you don't want to do this. Like they gave me an ultimatum. And God was like, no, Mona, I'm going to go ahead and work through you, and I'm going to represent you. And what my mother said is true, because I went through that similar down the road. And my father and my mother, they both witnessed and was a part of my wedding, and they both witnessed being a part of my bill of divorce when I went my divorce decree. But with my I had a conversation with my father, and he's just basically like, you know, he was young and stupid and dumb and made really messed up decisions. Really messed up decisions. And my mother, she feels like, how her excuse, well, not excuses, she talks about unequally yoked with somebody. I'm like, but y'all both met each other when y'all was in Bible study, Mom. My father honestly should have been a preacher. He would literally do Bible study, preach the word of God. But again, adultery. It was women that were coming across him, and he was committing adultery, always cheating on my mother, always. And she got to the point where she just was like, I'm not going to deal with it no more. And then, and I had to tell my father to have to go through that. And I was like, and so I had this persona on men that literally say, okay, I promise I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna be here for you. And when they did not, I would go off. And I remember, and explained to my father that my own husband acknowledged that. He acknowledged, I understand how you feel because your dad wasn't there when you were younger. Now my dad was there like spurts through my life. Like, he'd come in and out of my life. And then in high school, my mother basically dropped all of us off to him. But this other woman made sure that she didn't want us to have this bond with our own father. That was a jealous woman. And my mother even mentioned, even when she got sick, and when she was dealing with, my mother even mentioned, and your father left her. I said, Ma, they was committing adultery. They weren't even supposed to be together. Y'all, I lie to you not. This is some real stuff. When my father's health started to decline, the woman that he committed adultery with and married, her health started to decline too. I mean, it was like both of them was going through stuff. So, prime example, my father got out of a major surgery. Then all of a sudden, she got into a major surgery. Then all of a sudden, he got into the major surgery. Then all of a sudden, both of them got into a major surgery. And then they had, we there was kids in between. It was still in school. And here I am I'm trying to pick up the pieces and help my father. And even the woman that he was with, my father was with me by then. But even the woman that he was with, her health started to go down. So now we got younger brothers and sisters, so we trying to make sure that he's okay to be able to help my younger brothers and sisters. I'm gonna tell you something how God works. I remember needing needing some cash or whatever like that to help out. My mother, my mother reached in her own pockets to give to my father so he can help his situation out. And I'm not going to say talk about karma, but I realized when these surgeries just kept coming back to back, and her health and the kids getting, rebellious and this, that, and the third, when all of these things started happening, I realized something. Somebody's there's a curse, or somebody's doing roots. Something is going on. So I remember, like, asking God, like, what in the world is going on here? That it's her health, his health, her health. It's like they were piggybacking, and then it was like adultery. And I said, my dad, you got to free yourself from this. That's why she's having affliction too. See, I learned with my own eyes because I seen my own family member go through it, and I seen the effects that the adulterous woman and man go through physically. And I said, it's adultery. And I told my mother. So when me and my mother had the conversation, I said, no, that right there, he was not supposed to even be with her. Him being with her, that's when he basically abandoned you. And the repercussions, that lady could have been married to another man, had good health, a whole some kids and everything, great health. You see what I'm saying? But she decided, you're gonna come between a marriage, you're gonna carry on these certain things. And she suffered greatly health wise, and at the end of the day has nothing to show for, not married, and she living with her sister. I'm sure she's in, God is restored and blessing her now in her life, because her children are there with her. But to have gone through that, and that's why I be telling people, don't mess with no married man, because not only are you mentally going to deal with certain things, but physically you're going to go through certain things. I've seen the affliction of rebellious. And it's not no mediocre affliction. It's like amputation affliction. I've seen it with my own eyes. That's why I'm like, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. I fear God and I've seen it with my own eyes. Oh my goodness, there's a lot of traffic out here. I fear God and I've seen it with my own eyeballs. I've seen it with my own eyeballs. Um, I've seen what it does. And even with the second set of children, the third set of children my father had, they dealt with times when dad wasn't there either. And I'm like, and I told my father, you were a really good dad. You were a fun father to be around with. Like, honestly, my father reminded me of a Martin Lawrence. Like, he went cursing and all of that, but he just had this funny, um, he just had this he was just really funny. He was just a real fun dad to be around with. We had fun, we played around, we joked. He was a good father. But when that was taken away, I was heartbroken. I was young. I was heartbroken. A child feels that. And I remember telling my mother about, I remember we were young, and I remember the green van, and my mother said to me, let me explain to you about that green van, because my father had a green van. It was one of them vans back in the day that had the sink, and you can make it into a bed and all of that in the back or whatever. And I remember going on trips, and my father, us being in that car, we were eating and stuff. My mother said, "Let me tell you about that car." Now, my mother, me and her, we had a conversation later on that night, and she said that van, which y'all didn't know, is that we were homeless for about a good year, and we stayed in that van, and we camped at this place called Watkins Park. Like back in the day, families were camping there for months at a time. And then it struck my memory. I remember that. I remember that they had like shower rooms for the women, and the other one for the men. But we would go to the park all the time. We would be eating, cooking out and stuff. And I said, see, this is the difference, Mom. Those weren't bad memories for me. And the reason why is because I had my mother and I had my father. A child would know the difference between, if you're staying in a van. We always had clean clothes, because I remember going to the laundromat and everything. And yes, she was right, because I remember, when I was younger, we had a house, but my father ended up losing the house. And then for some months, we, all four of her children, all four of us stayed in the van. My mother and my father would go to work, and we stayed at this park. It was like a nature park, but it was a camping ground, and we stayed there. And then later on, we moved into an apartment. My father left, and for years, my mother sustained all four of her children into that apartment. And then we moved from there after a while, because issues, with other kids and stuff started happening. But I had explained to my mother, like, I was like, well, so my mother, when she thinks about stuff like that, it cringes that she went through this situation with this man, with her husband and her children. And I was like, well, on the other end, I was just looking like, my father's there, my mother's there. I didn't know anything else. I felt protected, even when we were staying on a camping ground. I felt protected. So um so anyway, so we were talking, and when my mother brought up all of these situations and stuff that she went through, and then what my father did, and my father being with another woman, and I'm not gonna lie, even I felt like, shoot, I can understand why you don't want to even deal with the person no more. They say you burn your bridges, and it gets to the point where and then it's just, this is, and her thing was like, what man can walk away from his children? And I understood that because when you walk away from your children and you deny your children, there is there's a shame. There's a shame like no to come around, and there's a shame like no other. Like, and my mother said, and these are my children that came out of me. There's a shame like no other. And before then, my father was there. He was there for everyone's birth. He was there. He was there. But again, going back to the conversation, and I'm switching from the conversation from my mother to my father, speaking to him, you know, he was basically saying, like, Mona, I believe that, let me tell you, he's going to come around and he's going to apologize. I said, Dad, you didn't come around our oldest sister until she was grown, until she was like in her like 30s, pretty much. And I mean, my thing is like I was there with wishful thinking, but when I look at the examples of other people's marriages, that's why I say you don't understand that your marriage, your children looks at it and it affects them in such a way that when they grow, that when they're older, yes, we can forgive. All things are not the same, yeah, but there's an issue when your community of folks, you see the same thing over and over again: the single mother, the fourth wife, the third wife. You see how he treated his wife and how she treated her husband. And then you look at your own situation. And yes, prayer, we can pray for things. And God does hear prayer. God gives free will to a man and a woman, whether you're going to serve God. He gives you the same free will to be apart, be with your husband or be with your wife, be around your children. He's giving you that will to make the right decision. And the truth is people make the wrong decisions and your children suffer from that decision that you make, whether it be a good decision or whether it be a bad decision. They will inherit what you have done, which you have taught. When the father teaches the son to man up and own up to the things that you've done wrong so your path can be clear, that son has been brought up in such a way to do just that. But when a son strays or be rebellious against his father and do the opposite, there's repercussions that you're going to deal with. And yes, there is forgiveness, but those memories of that, you can't undo that. My younger sister, she recalled when my dad took her to New York, and he left, you know, he left her, and she was just would go places and just sit by herself, and she was just hoping that my father was going to, and that's when I was young and I was just running away. I was on my own. My father at this point, he had another woman in his face that he was committing adultery with. He wasn't even paying attention to the kids that was going out young, running away, and not even running away, but just doing them. And when I called my sister to say, hey, Carla, she broke down crying like, Mona, come and get me. And here I am. I'm 15 years old. But when my mama came back in the picture, and I remember because my mother dropped us off to my father. My mother came back in the picture like, where's my children? The oldest one got pregnant. Me, I was doing me, like I was grown. My two siblings, my father then shipped them to New York with his grandmother. And my father was living this life again, like, hey, I just got this wife and these new sets of kids. My mother came home and came back to pick up her kids, and she called 911. She called 911 and she said, I left my children with this man and they are not with him. My father, when I tell you, my father scattered around and got everybody. And when I had word where I was staying at, I shouldn't have been staying there. When I got word my father was on the way to come and get us, because his wife, real wife, came back and said, you better get my kids. So he picked up everyone and then we was back with my mother again. We was back with my mother again. But anywho, so saying that, my sister, she felt a certain way about my dad too. I'm trying to tell y'all some real stuff. You better make right with your children, because they may not say anything now because they're too young, but it's going to come a point in the time when they're older and they're going to be speaking and they're going to tell you how they felt and what they felt. Because like I said, with my dad, now is, I'm grown, so now he's just like, I made dumb choices, Mona. I was stupid, committing adultery, always cheating, falling for the trap, and I was just young and stupid, and I'm sorry. And that's what it was. Made the wrong decisions, um wanted to do, and my mother was saying, she was trying to be this wife, and this is my husband, I have 4 children, and trying to follow everything he was doing, but it was going downhill, and it got to the point where it was stressing her all the time, stressing her all the time. And how many women I know that was trying to be this good wife. Now I'm not sitting up here trying to say that all women are, all wives are just saints or whatever. But I understand where she was coming from, where she was literally, just had 4 kids and was trying to be a really good wife. But it was like every time she turned around, something was going wrong, and a lot of it stemmed from adultery. A lot of it stemmed from adultery. So again, after I went ahead when I was dealing with my situation with my own husband, when I prayed and asked God to show me, and He showed me, and then I looked at all of I'm picking up all of the pieces when I was younger and all of the things that happened to me. I just said, nah, it's not worth it. It's not worth it to either take. It's not worth to take on someone else to act like that's your husband. It's not worth it, because I saw what my my father's adulterous wife was going through. The second woman that he married, I saw what she was going through. I remember one time walking, and I saw her walking, and she looked like she lost her mind. She looked like she was crazy. And I'm like, how are you? Are you okay? Because my younger brothers and sisters, that's their mother. And I remember her saying, these kids and what I'm dealing with and what I'm going through. And by the time then, my father, he kind of left the scene. And she was like, everything I'm going through, I'm just real tired. I mean, she just looked crazy. And it just flowed out of my mouth. And I said, I know, because my mother went through the same thing. It was that karma. And when I would see her, I would just give her money. Like when I would see her in the streets, and I'd be like, here, let me buy this for you, or here, put this in your pocket, because those were my younger brothers and sisters. That was their mother. But I saw the suffering that she went through with adultery. That's why I be telling y'all, especially you chicks that sitting up here married to you think you married to a married man, you not. You committing adultery. I've seen the youth of women go out the window, and then all of a sudden they just look crazy. They look crazy. Like when I look at my father's second wife, she had nothing on my mother. My mother is just a beautiful woman. And my mother, she aged gracefully too. She had nothing on my mother. And I remember when my grandfather passed away and somebody was like, "Is that your mother?" And I'm like, "Absolutely not. That's my mother." You know? But a lot of, even my own husband, I'll never forget, my own husband was like, "What the heck was your father thinking compared to the woman that he's with and your mother? Why on earth would he choose? Why would he do that?" I remember my husband having a conversation about that. And it was amazing because when I had this conversation with my father last night, my father told me he knew that he made a mistake by leaving my mother and going with a different woman, is when he ended up doing that and all of the crap that he was going through, and that the other woman was just not his equal. And he just knew right then and there, like he regretted it. And I said to my father, "How come you never, why didn't you ever apologize to my mother?" And this is where the whole thing coming from, because I'm like, "How come you never apologized?" And he said, I did. I apologized about, I think it was like 3 years ago. This is the time when my father was in the hospital a couple of years back. And my mother, because I was on the phone crying, I couldn't deal with it. I was just like, "This is too much for me to see, Ma. Like, I'm not built for this type stuff." And my mother stepped up, my own mother. And then she decided to be there for my father and go to his doctor's appointments and check on him. But my father decided that one day she was going to take him to Golden Corral. He didn't even know that. Well, they were going to go to, the Golden Corral. I guess you remember the restaurant. He didn't know that. But he wanted her to take him somewhere else. And my mother was like, "No, I'm going to just take you back home." And he was kirking off and calling my mother all type of names and everything. And she just said, "Oh, okay." She was just like, that was it for her. And my mother told me, it didn't dawn to her till she got home. That was their anniversary. So yesterday when I was talking to my dad, he's telling me his side of the story. And your mother wouldn't take me and whoop, whoop, whoop. And I didn't say anything. And I just said, "Dad, did you know that was your anniversary?" And he was like, "What do you, no, we got married." I was like, "Yeah, that was your anniversary." I remember mommy telling me about that incident. And I'm like, "You didn't even realize that was your anniversary." And I was like, "See, people don't understand. Like, we really wrestle against flesh or blood. We don't, I'm sorry, we don't wrestle against flesh or blood. It's principalities, evil, and high positions. That day that you was going off and all of this crazy stuff, what made you go off that day? You didn't even realize it was your anniversary." See, that was the enemy coming in like he always do. And so my father was like, "What?" So my father was like, "Wait a minute." And I was like, "Yeah, I remember mommy telling me, she said she dodged a bullet." But I'm like, "Okay, you can call it what you want." But my mother say, "That's kin, that's y'all kinfolk." And I'm like, "No, that's still your husband. He's still your husband, regardless if you don't want to deal with them. You've had enough with them and you've washed your hands from it. He's still your husband. You don't have to. You can go through the remainder of your life remaining unmarried, or you can reconcile, but you still marry him. And it doesn't matter how many times he cheated on you, or the instability. As long as you're both there, he's still that. But I thought it was very amazing that both of them was basically giving my husband, the one that I married, my covenant husband, a pass card. Like, "Well, Ramona, he was dealing with something else too." And I'm like, "Nah, I mean, I get it. There's been so much that I can feel sorry for. But if you know how to get in your car and turn them keys on and drive up the street and drive here and drive that, then you know better. If you know how to follow directions and stay in between the lines on the highway, then you know better." There's only there's only but so much. And of course, you have to forgive. But people say we forgive but don't forget. A lot of people don't forget. That's just the nature in people, is that We forgive what we don't forget. You know, God forgave David. He didn't forget the sin, and that's the reason why he got punished by, the sin that he committed with Bathsheba. It's one of those things in nature. It's like, we Jesus said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." To forgive those who prosecuted him, but we don't forget that it happened. You know what I mean? We don't forget. That's why I'm trying to tell y'all some real stuff. Be very careful of how you treat your wife and your husband and the children that you have. And even if you didn't have any children, people as a whole, as a community, would look at how you treated your wife. And it's just like one lady who left a comment and said, it's a lot of us out here that want to get married, that's longing to get married and never been married. And every time we see that, folks go in and they put in a divorce, it hurts us because it makes us feel like, is there any hope for marriage, or am I ever going to get married? And then you have the newlyweds that get married and they feel like they're hoping they can make it to the 10-year mark, the 15-year mark, the 30-year mark. They should never feel like that. But a lot of this came from betrayal, unforgiveness, adultery. A lot of it came and it stemmed from that. And it trickled down, and people saw the worst of people. Even, when my father was talking about when they were in the court, and I said, let me tell you something, Dad. Court, going to court and have you bringing out the worst of people. Like, I literally had to bring out the worst of my husband, and he had to say the worst things about me in order for us to win. In order for you to win this case before a judge, you have to hurt your wife and throw her under the bus. In order for you to win this case before the judge, you have to hurt your husband and throw him under the bus. Even when you didn't want to, because at one point in time, I was just like, I needed help, and they had these pro bono lawyers that could represent you. And the guy was like, "Ma'am, it sounds to me that you're really still in love with your husband, and he did all of these things. But in order for you to do this, you're gonna need to file for a divorce." And I'm like, "I cannot file for no daggone divorce." And I chose not to. My mother, she chose to. She was like, "Look, I have 4 kids." She was like, "I have 4 kids, no support whatsoever." So that's exactly what she did. And I too felt like these court systems, like they're really designed to do damage. They don't usher in um, healthy families. It's more so like a split up factory. Anywho, so that was the conversation that I had with my dad and my mom. From where it stands, my mother's just like, what will be, what will be. Went through it, done it, don't want to deal with it. I'm good. That's where she's at. But I can still sense that she's still hurt behind it, because when she talks about it, it definitely it's a hurtful thing for her. When she talks about it, it's definitely hurtful. And I'm like, if y'all even had a conversation about that. And I even asked my father, I don't know what it is in men, and I would say this in men and generally, because it is it's a lot more men that can just walk away and just say, I don't know what it is that you don't think. And I told my father, like, did you, and my father see how hard I've been grinding. My father sees how hard, like, I'm out, like, grinding. He sees it. And he's like, you need to get rest. And I be thinking, like, and I had to tell, like, say, I told my father, now you see how I'm going back and forth to work and trying and this, that, and the third. And my father is like, Mona, you need to, like, get rest. You need to this. I said, how you think, I have one. I have one living child. The rest of my babies are in heaven. How do you think she did it with four? And that wasn't the only set of kids. My father had two before my mother had four. Yeah, so that was the conversation that I had with my parents yesterday. And there were things too when I was young, like I was trying to make sense of it and already knew. Nobody explained it to me but my mother. She basically validated it, and I was just like, okay, you know. But looking at what my mother went through, looking at and I told my father too, like, especially with the whole independence thing, I'm like, that came from my mother. I remember being 14 years old. My first real job was at McDonald's. My first job, that people be like, your first job. My first real job on payroll, I was 14 years old working at McDonald's. And some of the money I would give to my mother because I was staying with her. And then I was trying, like, I remember, like, McDonald's, you can bring home all the free food pretty much. And I would just bring it home and, try to help my mother the best way that I could. And it was my little part-time job, but it was something where I had no choice. It was like, I'm not gonna be sitting around here waiting for my father's child support check, and again, I was 14, and I remember when my mother dropped us off to my father when I was in high school, and I was literally trying to get another job so I can help out with my brothers and sisters. And I remember around that time finding out, in DC, that you had to have a work permit. And I was like, well, daggone it, I was on payroll when I was 14. And it's amazing because when my husband's parents met me, they thought I was just like, anything woman. When they saw me, they just thought like, oh, she has no class. She doesn't know. I'm like, you have no idea. You have no idea. But anywho, so getting back to the conversation, so I think my father had a realization, and I told my father, like even Carla, like it's certain things, especially your daughters, that we perceive because of the things that you did when we were younger, like leaving. That was, and after that, like the mistrust, and I remember again my husband before we got married saying, babe, I know that your dad left, and because back, you would tell all your stuff, especially to the man you love, and I'm about to get married to him. And I was like, and when my husband did the same thing, oh, that was just awful. That was awful. But I understand my mother because I'm at a place where I'm like, I don't ever want to experience that again. That was such a bad experience. You don't even really want to think too much about it. I know I talk about it a lot. I don't ever want to experience that again. I don't ever want to experience that pain ever again of somebody promising you and then turning around and just leaving you. Now, I told y'all before that I had this dream with my daughter. She had to be, and she was an infant. She was still a baby. I don't even think she looked like she was walking in the dream, but her father was holding her. And the pain and the sorrow, not pain, it was the sorrow that was coming from my daughter while she was crying and while her father was holding her. It was because she was crying because her dad was not there. and she was crying. Now, why would I have a dream? And this is when her father recently had left that I had this dream. Why would I have a dream of my daughter crying and her dad was holding her and he was patting her on the back? He was just holding her and I was rubbing her back. And I remember my father-in-law was coming towards us and I put my hand up as to tell him to stop, do not come near us, because it was him in a dream that basically caused a lot of damage to our family. But the pain, the sorrow that was coming from my daughter, I can't even explain that. I felt it, and it was sorrow. It was like deep sorrow. So what I got from that dream is that even at a young age, they can feel and sense when the other when your dad is not there. When your dad is not there, even at a young age, because she was an infant, and I'm like, for her to be an infant and had that much sorrow, that I as her mother felt it. I felt it. But I thank God is good. God is good. But yeah, I had that. I did have a talk with my father, and I did have a talk with my mother. And my mother is like, basically, in a nutshell, she went through a whole bunch, and she was like, all of these years, and you get to this point where basically you washed up, and and in a nutshell, this is what my mother was saying in her own words. But I could still feel and hear that my mother's still hurt by those things, and she has every right to be, because that was her experience with my father, of betrayal and a lot of things that she had to go through. And I told my father too, one thing, because my father would talk a lot of mess about my mother. Like when I was younger, he would just say a lot of bad things about my mother. But I told my father, not one time did my mother ever talk bad about you in front of us. Not one time did she ever talk bad about you in front of us. Now, I've mentioned you say a lot of negative things about my mother, but she's never said that. And when I had that conversation with my father, I had to let him be known that, I'm just letting you know, like, my mother does not mention you. Like, he really does. She doesn't. But I just had to have this conversation because I guess as someone who got put away and dealt with a similar situation, I just wanted to know, with the individual, that you walked away from your children just as the same way as my husband walked away from his. Now, in the sense, me and my husband went to court, and I don't know what they was thinking by thinking they were going to try to take my child from me. That's what his parents had in mind, and God was like, no. And after all of the children that me and my husband had, I guess they felt like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to, set it up where you walk away from her, separate for 6 months, we file a divorce, then we take the child from her. We'll just make it look like, she don't have a place to go. Y'all have family money. We'll go in and get the child. But it didn't work that way. It didn't work that way. What ended up happening was he ended up, I wouldn't to say destroying his family, but he ended up separating himself like he wanted to from his family. In the ditch that he digged, he fell into it. They used the system to try to abuse it, and it just backfired. And it was an unpleasant situation to even go through. I wish I would have never went through that situation. And the whole time I would have to take my daughter up to court because I'm representing myself. So sometimes I would take her with me, and sometimes she would literally just. I literally had to give her Motrin and Tylenol because she was just running a fever, and I'm in court. I told y'all that one time I was cross-examining my own husband, and I looked to the side, my daughter just wandering off. I'm like, "Excuse me, Your Honor." I had to go over there and grab her. It was, and I realized later on down the line, I was like, the devil was really trying to take the joy out of me having my child, because as soon as I had my daughter, it's like all hell broke loose. It's like all hell broke loose. Let me get on up in here. Whew, today is really but yeah. But all I can say is this: is that be careful what you do. Even myself, I have to say, because I'm, trying to grind, and when you literally trying to take care of your family, I have to say, Mona, you need to leave and go home. You cannot stay after another hour. You need to go see your child. You cannot, you know, work on making somebody else whatever. You still have a family and an obligation. You still have a child that needs to see you. And so I'm really praying for God to transition me where I'm able to be around my baby more often than often. Because again, it doesn't work when you don't see your dad and you don't see your mom. And so anyway, so I had a conversation with my mother and my father. And I don't know, you probably went through some certain things in your life with your father and your mother and perceived the world differently, or relationships differently, or your marriage differently, or your children expressed how they felt and how they were affected because of your marriage. And who knows, your children always probably felt like they had, or you always probably felt like you had a safe spot because your mother and your father was there. Your mother and your father. And now I remember going to my grandmother's house when I was younger. So my grandparents were always there. They were a team, granddad, grandma. So I remember seeing that model in my life. And that was a huge impact as well, in a positive way. But you know, years went by, people got old, and then the selfishness kicked in. And then again, you just look like this is what you look forward to. You you with someone for 40 years, and then they just up and go live across town somewhere. Not saying all marriages are like that, because there are plenty of great marriages out here that are doing great, and they're a great model for people to say, this is what I strive to be, or look at them, they've been married for 50 years. Even my mother said she remember friends that her and my father used to hang with, and they still married. And she's like, that's something that it could have been. And I said, well, maybe, Mom, you shouldn't have filed for the divorce. And of course, she's just like, what? There was no other choice that I had to. But anywho, I just wanted to share that. I'm glad I had the conversation with my father and my mother. It really opened up a lot of things. I'm really grateful I had that conversation. And it made I feel better now that I got that off my chest, to actually explain to my father, and even my father telling me what he was young, and his decisions that he made were not good decisions. So all I can say is, be wise in your walk, seek ye the kingdom of God and all of his righteousness, and everything else should be added. Because when you look at people who make these mistakes, it always leads to the same old thing, and that's just destruction. It's just excuses, lost time, and healing afterwards, and forgiveness. But why even go down that road? So don't commit adultery, you know, and you won't have those effects on your children. Y'all have a blessed day today.